All right, we're gonna watch Slavery Crash Course as a student.
He's a terrible philosopher. Here's the truth about slavery. It was coerced labor that relied upon
And it won't let us
intimidation
skip.
and brutality and dehumanization. And this wasn't just
Come on,
Pay
skip.
attention during this video because
Okay.
there will be 4 different questions that you will be asked.
This wasn't just a cultural system, it was a legal one. I mean, Louisiana law proclaimed that a slave owes his master a respect without bounds and an absolute obedience. The signal feature of slaves' lives was work. I mean, conditions and tasks varied, but all slaves labored usually from sunup to sundown and almost always without any pay. Most slaves worked in agriculture on plantations, and conditions were different depending on which crops were grown. Like slaves on the rice plantations of South Carolina had terrible working conditions.
Most slaves worked. Yes, that's true. Rice plantations. So that continue.
Conditions, but they labored under the task system, which meant that once they had completed their allotted daily work, they would have time to do other things. But lest you imagine this is like how we have work. Work and leisure time, bear in mind that they were owned and treated as property. On cotton plantation, most slaves worked in gangs, usually under the control of an overseer or another slave who was called a driver. This was back-breaking work done in the southern sun and humidity, and so it's not surprising that whippings or the threat of them were often necessary to get slaves to work. It's easy enough to talk about the brutality of slave discipline, but it can be difficult to internalize it. Like, you look at these pictures, but because you've seen them over and over again, they don't have the power they once might have. The pictures can tell a story about cruelty, but they don't necessarily communicate how arbitrary it all was, as, for example, in this story told by a woman who was a slave as a young girl. The overseer went to my father one morning and said, "Bob, I'm gonna whip you this morning." Daddy said, "I ain't done nothing." And he said, "I know it. I'm gonna whip you to keep you from doing nothing." And he hit him with that cowhide. You know, it would cut the blood out of you with every lick if they hit you hard. That brutality, the whippings, the brandings, the rape, was real, and it was intentional because in order for slavery to function, slaves had to be dehumanized. This enabled slaveholders to rationalize what they were doing, and it was hoped to reduce slaves to the animal property that is implied by the term chattel slavery. So the idea was that slaveholders wouldn't think of their slaves as human, and slaves wouldn't think of themselves as human. But it didn't work.
All right, so there's that. So then if you want to see the progress, you just come over here to progress. Okay, check it out. And you can export right there. So then you just click that. And then I believe that's everything.